Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Fantasy Baseball. I'm John Kuh, and I am joined by my co host, Patrick Fitzgerald. In this episode, we're going to go over the latest news and notes around baseball, recap the hitter and pitcher performances from this past week, and of course, give some streamer recommendations at the end of the show. But before we get into all that, Patrick, how are you doing?
Hey John, I'm doing well. Got my new computer set up for the pod, so hoping y'all can see me, as clear as ever. Yeah, doing pretty well. Got my fantasy teams. I think all three are at least in the top half of my leagues right now after last week, so I'm happy about that. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. All my fantasy teams are not doing super hot. I think I'm in the top half of two of those leagues. And then my home league, I'm not doing so hot, mainly because some guys are unable to hit, and I don't necessarily have the greatest pitching staff. But sometimes you just have to deal with a couple really poor Tanner Houck performances
Oh,
before you decide that you got to get rid of him because he had I think it was a two-start week last week, or it was the week before. Uh, and it was just awful. I don't even know why I held on for the second start. I think it was because it was against like Miami or the White Sox, and I was like, he might be good, and he was not good.
yeah, quite the fall off from him. The home league's the worst one to do badly in because then you got to
Yes,
hear it from all your friends.
exactly. Yeah, I just like, oh, how'd you lose to this guy? It's like, I wasn't trying to. Yeah, yeah. Fantasy baseball. I feel like there's a lot that's going on right now in terms of injuries too that haven't necessarily hitting my team. I kind of dealt with the injuries at the beginning of the season, but I was going through the injury list this week and I was like, wow, there's kind of some big names that are hitting the injured list as well. So definitely something to keep track of as the season goes on.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I felt like I was getting hit and like right after my drafts, guys were getting injured and it was driving me crazy. And then I feel like it's been, my guys are slowly working their ways back, and then other people are just their teams are, guys are dropping like flies. So I feel like I've mostly avoided it, and I got a couple guys who did get injured for me during the season, but are coming back pretty soon. So I'm in relatively good shape. Knock on wood, obviously.
Right. Yeah, I think in my TGFBI team, I'm currently waiting for both Brandon Woodruff and Ronald Acuna Jr. to make their
Mm,
return, and it sounds like Woodruff might be coming back soonish. We'll see. We'll talk about that in a little bit.
yeah,
But
absolutely.
but before we get into it, just a reminder that you can follow our podcast on Twitter at ThisWeekPL. You can send us your fantasy baseball questions to our email at thisweekplpod@gmail.com. Lastly, make sure you subscribe to or follow the podcast on whatever streaming platform you listen to. We're on all of them: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever else you listen to your podcast. Make sure you follow us and leave a 5-star review if you enjoy the show. All right, we are going to get into our news and notes for the week, starting off with injury list placements. A couple big names to start out. Logan Gilbert of the Mariners, 15-day IL with a right elbow flexor strain. Justin Martinez of the Diamondbacks also going on the 15-day IL with a shoulder issue. He was the closer for the team. In his place, Shelby Miller picked up the save a couple outings ago. Tyler Glasnow also got put on the 15 DIL dealing with a shoulder issue. Kyle Higashioka, Texas Rangers, 10 DIL with a mild left intercostal strain. It's unlikely you had him on your teams unless you're in a two catcher league. And even then, it'd be pretty surprising if you had
Mm.
him on your teams, but just something to keep in mind. Tyler Fitzgerald of the Giants, who we actually talked about last week with how good he was doing, he went on the 10-day IL with a left rib fracture. Dylan Moore of the Mariners, 10-day IL with right hip inflammation. JT Ginn of the Athletics going on the IL with elbow inflammation. And then a couple Orioles for you. Jordan Westberg going on the 10-day IL with a hamstring strain. And his teammate Tyler O'Neill going on the IL with neck soreness, which we kind of discussed last week, but we weren't sure what the team was going to do there. But obviously, I think the two biggest names are Logan Gilbert and Tyler Glasnow. Of course, you hate to hear about a pitcher with a elbow issue, but it sounds like with Gilbert at least that they aren't seeing this as a very serious injury, but something that might take a little bit more than 2 weeks to come back from.
Yeah, flexor strain is one of those injuries where, aside from the obvious ones, like the tears and everything like that, when you hear flexor strain, it's definitely one of the most anxiety-inducing injuries because that can mean Tommy John around the corner. It does seem like they're pretty optimistic with Gilbert, which is good to hear. I mean, he's such a workhorse, so you'd hope that he's not, going to miss an entire season because he has to go under the knife. So yeah, you just gotta hope for the best. I don't think you can really trade him away or trade for him at this point just because of all the uncertainty. But yeah, huge bummer seeing a guy like that go down. As soon as we start to label a guy as durable, something like this, happens. So it just tells you how hard it is to have confidence in any pitcher staying healthy.
Right. Yeah. Especially, I mean, Gilbert, who's been pretty much a workhorse for 2 seasons, maybe three at this point. Yeah, it's always tough to see this type of injury pop up. Looking at some returns from the injured list, Luis Arraez came back from the 7-day IL. He's dealing with a concussion from a collision a couple weeks ago. Tony Gonsolin of the Dodgers returned on Wednesday against the Marlins. He pretty much solidified his spot with Tyler Glasnow going on the IL. He pretty much fills in that fifth starter position for the Dodgers. Lance McCullers Jr. is returning to the mound for the first time in, I believe, 2 years for the Astros on Sunday. The Phillies also announced that Ranger Suarez is going back to the mound on Sunday as well. Dalton Varsho, the Blue Jays came back from the injured list, already made one highlight catch in center, although he doesn't seem to be hitting much, so probably not really worth a pickup in fantasy right now. And Lucas Giolito, who we'll talk about in a bit, did return on Wednesday with a pretty decent start against the Blue Jays. For guys like McCullers or Suarez or Gonsolin, I'll even loop Giolito into this. Any of those guys that feel like a must pick up in like a 12-teamer for you?
Yeah, so first, just want to say it's cool to see these guys back on the mound. I think Gonsolin, McCullers, and Giolito all three of them missed all of last year.
Yeah.
So when you have these super long list of injured pitchers, it's nice to see couple guys get crossed off that and actually take the mound. I think so. McCullers is the one who hasn't pitched yet, or McCullers and Suarez haven't pitched yet this year. So you're going to want to see it first that they're pitching this weekend. So in your fab leagues, you should get a look at them before you can bid. And then we saw Gonsolin and Giolito both pitch, pretty recently, and they both look pretty good. Gonsolin's stat line was better, but he also had an easier matchup against the Marlins. And their stuff looked like it used to look. That they're not aces, but they're solid pitchers. I think in 12-team leagues, they're kind of right on the fringe. They're definitely watch list types. If you have a hole in your rotation, I say go ahead and add them. Especially Gonsolin gets the Marlins again. He just faced the Marlins in his first start and, looked good as most pitchers do against the Marlins. So that's a pretty easy, stream. In terms of a long-term hold, not too sure. Suarez, I think, is probably Suarez and Giolito's maybe close behind him are kind of the two that I'd say I like the best. Suarez doesn't, he has great stretches where he looks like an ace, but we know that he's more of just kind of a high threes ERA type guy with a little bit less than a strikeout an inning, get you some wins and cover some innings on a good team.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you there. I think Gonsolin too, if you're in a wins league, makes a lot of sense to go with him. Obviously, playing for the Dodgers. So, yeah, but it is like you said, it is nice to see all these guys come back after pretty extended times on the injury list for all of them.
Yeah, hopefully they don't go right back on like Spencer Strider. That was a huge
Yeah, exactly. All right, we've got a bunch of just miscellaneous injury news to cover, so let's try to breeze through this. Of course, the biggest name on here, Cole Reagans, the Kansas City Royals, had a mild left groin strain. It sounds like it's very mild, but it was mild enough that they skipped his start on Wednesday, and they don't know if they're going to keep him out for any longer than that. Mike Trout is currently day-to-day with knee soreness. He was removed from the game on Wednesday with precautionary reasons. Obviously, keep following that to see if there's anything notable about that move. AJ Smith-Shawver of the Atlanta Braves is day-to-day after getting hit in the arm by a line drive on Tuesday. Thankfully, the x-rays came back negative. Michael Soroka of the Nationals could be coming back after throwing 78 pitches in his last rehab start. Royce Lewis of the Twins is likely to return next week on Monday. Willie Castro of the Twins is also likely to return this weekend. Royce was dealing with a hamstring issue. Willie was dealing with an oblique issue. AJ Puck of the Diamondbacks, the team announced he does not need season-ending surgery, but he was transferred to the 60-day IL. So if you are looking for a closer, like we mentioned, Shelby Miller picked up the save for the Diamondbacks earlier this week. Brandon Woodruff, as I mentioned earlier, the Brewers, he's going to probably make one more rehab start after going 5.2 innings in his most recent appearance. But the Brewers could also just opt to skip that rehab start and just have him start with the Major League team. And I think with Woodruff, to me, it's just like if he looks good, just keep him. As soon as he starts looking bad, I think then he's just immediately droppable. just because it's probably another injury issue. With the stuff that he deals with, I think like once the injury happens, it's hard for me to envision him coming back or just being successful in that season.
Yeah, he's coming back from a really serious shoulder injury, missed all of last year. I think Nick on his list, he ranks the injured guys on a, projected rank for when they come back. And most guys, he has like a 10 to 20 spot range. With Woodruff, it's like if he's clicking, he's a top 20 guy. If he's not, he's, going to be ranked 70th. So he's kind of just a huge question mark. We haven't seen it. I'm a little concerned with how many starts they're giving him in the minors. It makes me feel like they don't think he's ready because he pitched 5 innings in AAA and now he pitched 5.2 innings in high A. Like you'd think he'd be ready to go, but I guess they really just are trying to take their time with him and make sure that he's going to be successful right when he comes back. So hopefully they're setting him up for success, but it is a little bit concerning, I think, how long it's taking.
Right. There's only so many innings left in that arm. It kind of feels like.
Yeah, it could be the case.
Yeah. Ivan Herrera of the Cardinals is currently rehabbing in AAA. Good news for him. Obviously, he was really turning it on right before he hit the injured list, which is unfortunate. But when he comes back, he probably should be a guy to pick up, or at least take off your injured list. Tyler Stevenson, we mentioned him last week. He's still continuing to rehab from his oblique injury in AAA. Corey Seager, the Rangers should be returning to game action soon. The Rangers haven't made an official transaction yet, but the news is kind of saying that he could be returning this Saturday. Walker Buehler of the Red Sox was experiencing some shoulder discomfort during his bullpen session. Will likely not start against the Twins this weekend. Ketel Marte could be activated from the injured list this weekend, so keep an eye out for that. Ezequiel Tovar of the Rockies could return sometime this week. Unclear if he's going to need a rehab assignment first, though, before he comes back to the majors. And then a couple rehab starts last weekend for a few pitchers who hit the injured list during spring training. Ryan Weathers went 3 innings, and then Yuri Perez went 1 inning. I know for Yuri, at least, he's on the 60-day IL, so he can't come back until June anyway, so they're going to slowly build him up. For Weathers, I believe he's on the 15-day, but I'm not 100% sure about that. So Miami might be motivated to bring him back a little sooner if his rehab starts looking okay.
Yeah, I think he did throw 3 innings, but it was only around 35 pitches. So he's got 2, if not 3 more rehab starts ahead of him. But the stuff apparently looked just like it looked in spring training when he was really pumping like 97, 98. So I have him on the IL in a league, so that would be great. Yeah, this list is exciting for me. I got, not that it's all about our leagues, but I got a middle infield composed of Ketel Marte and Corey Seager in one league, and then another league that's Ketel Marte and Ezequiel Tovar. So it's been a bummer not having them, but it looks like I might be getting them back pretty quick. So when a guy like Corey Seager hits the IL, to hear that he's going to be coming back in 10 days, you just got to take that as a win, because how injury prone he can unfortunately be sometimes.
Yeah, completely. All right, finally moving to some transactions. Alexis Diaz was optioned to AAA. He did not look great coming back from injury in his 12 innings that I think he pitched. Just did not look comfortable at all. Chase Petty of the Reds was called up to make his major league debut as the 27th man in a doubleheader. So, of course, he was sent back down to the minors, but it is encouraging to see that they were willing to call him up for this start. Noah Cameron of the Royals and AJ Bluebow of the Astros got called up for spot starts, but were immediately demoted after that. And Gunnar Hoglund, the number 2 prospect for the A's, is also getting the call up. Not sure when he is going to make his first start against, or who he's going to make his first start against. So a couple pitchers who, at least for the time being, looks like their spot starts in, Petty, Cameron, and Bluebow. Hoglund looks like he's going to be up for the time being. Any opinion on any of these guys to keep an eye out for in, let's just say, 12 teamers, or all of them kind of just fringe waiver guys at this point?
Yeah, I'd say if you have an NA spot, one of the 3 guys who got sent down might be worth holding on to if you don't have a better option. Hoglund's the one who's probably the most intriguing just for currently. I don't think you need to go, rush and add him in your 12-team leagues, but yeah, JT Ginn hitting the IL opens up a spot, and the options are Hoglund and Mitch Spence and Hogan Harris. So, not Jacob Young, I think, or not Jacob Young. I don't even remember the guy's name who started the other day for Jacob Lopez, I think it might be. But yeah, those guys, they're not really compelling options, so they want to give Hoglund a chance. I don't think I kind of like the other three guys better than him long term, but he's a fringe top 100 prospect, so he could spin some good starts for them. Cameron was cool. He took a no hitter into the seventh in his debut, but he also walked five guys. Had like since he was throwing a no hitter like a 060 BABIP, and it wasn't the stuff was not amazing. Just the results were. I'm not saying that he can't be good, but it was a little bit of smoke and mirrors in the first start. But yeah, it's cool to see some teams giving their prospect arms a chance this early in the season.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we are going to move on to player performances, and starting on Friday, April 25th, Patrick, who was awesome during Friday.
Yes, so we will be starting off with one of the most talked about players in fantasy the last week. This was the title character of our hitting recap from Justin Wainwright, Augustine Hunger Force. Of course, that's Augustine Ramirez, catcher for the Miami Marlins, who was just called up last week. In this game, he went 2 for 4 with a double, a home run, a run scored, and 2 RBI. The swing's a little bit unorthodox, but the power is undeniable. And he went yard at T-Mobile Park, one of the toughest places to hit in the league, as we know. Ramirez was one of the hottest fab ads this past weekend, along with A's first baseman Nick Kurtz, but he's outperformed Kurtz easily so far. Ramirez hitting 290 with 3 home runs and a steal, but he's 0 for his last 12, so he has fallen back to earth a little bit. Still has a 290 average, like I said, and the OPS right around 1. So he's still come out of the gates really hot. As we remember, he was part of the Jazz Chisholm trade from New York to Miami, and has broken in here with the Marlins. So I'm wondering, at what depth do we consider Ramirez to be a must roster? Obviously, catcher can be a pretty tricky position sometimes.
Yeah, I think for Ramirez, like they're clearly willing to play him also at DH, which I think is a key thing, right? He's not just a catcher; they're willing to put his bat in the lineup, and I think because of that, I wouldn't say he's a 12 teamer right at this point. Like he's probably in the 15 team conversation. If it's like a 12 teamer NL only, right, then of course you would go for that, I think. But yeah, I think in just standard 12 teamers, he's probably just a guy worth keeping an eye on. There now, granted, that being said, like the catchers have not been that great this season overall. So maybe if you want to just take a stab at a rookie who's kind of swung a little bit of a hot bat, maybe you could go for it. But I really wouldn't try to invest too much money, at least in a 12 teamer. For this, and I think 15 teamers is where it makes sense for him. And obviously, it's a 15 teamer two catcher. Then yeah, 100% go for it.
Yeah, and I think they're going to play him at DH a lot also because he's not considered to be a great defensive catcher. I think the Dodgers had like 4 stolen bases on him the other day. So there's a little bit of question marks about his long-term ability to stick back there, but obviously he's catcher eligible right now. I think 12 teamers is fringe. Like I don't see myself adding him and dropping like a struggling catcher like Wilson Contreras or Yainer Diaz. I'm not really ready to cut bait on those guys yet, even though Ramirez is appealing. I'm just looking at like the top rostered catchers, and it looks like it gets to like 10 deep around Yainer Diaz, Logan O'Hoppe, and I feel like all those guys are worth holding over Ramirez. And then it's like Ivan Herrera, Austin Wells, Keibert Ruiz, guys like that. I do feel like there's a conversation to be had comparing him to those three.
Yeah, and I think when you're discussing names like that, like Austin Wells and Kuiper, like that's streaming catcher territory, right? And so if the matchup makes sense, that's where I would consider it. And I think that's where maybe it gets interesting, right? Because he is kind of that fringe 12 teamer because like the names you mentioned with Herrera, with
Wells,
Wells with Ruiz, like they're droppable, right? I think Yiner's probably the place where I would not drop, and I've been dealing with a lot of Yiner issues in my dynasty league because he's just been not good. But thankfully, I also have Shea Langoliers on that same team, so I've been able to weather that storm. But yeah, I think when you start discussing names under Yiner, that's where it's like, yeah, this guy's just droppable, and I can swap him out for Ramirez for a week or two, and let's just see how it goes.
Right, and I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on his power and speed production because we know it's not a great lineup. So what will the counting stats look like?
Yeah, totally.
So on the pitching side, on the 25th, this is a name that I don't think I would have expected to be talking about as having potentially shallower league relevance, in 2025. But it's Colin Rea. So the Rea deal was Nick's SP Roundup title for the 25th, and on the 25th he faced the Phillies and threw 5 shutout innings with 3 hits, 2 walks, and 7 strikeouts which came from 9 whiffs and a 30% CSW on 92 pitches, and he got the win. So no quality start, but 5 shutout against the Phillies. You absolutely take that. And Ray has really stepped up with Justin Steele out for the season. He's, really filled the vacancy in the rotation well, and, given the Cubs exactly what they needed. There's a chance that he can keep being productive, but, Nick says not really at this level. He gives Ray the golden star for this outing, which is when someone does well that's unexpected. And he was still building up, but he's attacking a lot with the four-seamer, and this one had 41% CSW, but only 4 out of 49 whiffs, so pretty called strike reliant. The velo on that pitch is up a little bit from last year. He's sitting 94, 95 instead of the 93 last year, so that should help. But Nick knows that he doesn't really have a great approach against lefties. He has an unreliable splitter, curveball, and a cutter that's not really a great offering. So Nick, is recommending a little bit of caution. It's a guy who we've seen success from, and he, when he's on a good command run, he can post some good starts, but not super confident in his ability to sustain it over the full season. What I will say is he did pitch today against the Pirates, went 6 innings, 2 earned runs, and got the win against Paul Skeens. No less. Skeens, I think, gave up 3. So, the Cubs were able to exit Reyes outing with the lead. He only had 2 strikeouts, though. So, not a high volume strikeout arm, but he has great ratios. I think he has like a 1.46 ERA right now, which obviously isn't going to last. But yeah, is he a guy that we should, start thinking about maybe streaming in our 12 or even 10 team leagues?
I think when you look at his next matchups, I think he's a very clear, like, this guy should be a streamer in 12 teamers, right? He gets the Giants, or he's at least scheduled to get the Giants, the Marlins, and the White Sox, right? The Giants are a little scary, but they've been hobbled by injuries a little bit. The Marlins and the White Sox, we know what they are. So yes, they sometimes have the occasional really good game, but I think Rhea probably should be able to deal with those teams. Of course, I think maybe the one thing that's like a little scary about Rhea is just he doesn't have that high ground ball rate, and I think that works a lot better against poor teams because it just means he's a little bit susceptible to home runs. Right, he gave up a homer today in his game against Pittsburgh. So that's where maybe like the fear comes in of like, oh, like the ERA might not be as great. But I think at 12 teamers, he's definitely worth a stream. I think at 10 teamers, I'd consider it against the Marlins and the White Sox. Probably not against the Giants.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't play in any 10-team league, so I wasn't sure if, that was even a consideration for people at that depth. I do have him on a team right now because, I write the, expected starting pitcher schedules article every other week for us. And I noticed that the Cubs just have great matchups coming up. So I added him last week, just to get ahead of it because it's a 16-team league and starting pitching is very thin. So I was super happy with the quality start today. I'm planning on rolling him out there for those next 3. But yeah, it could, he could have a blow up outing where he gives up 5 or 6 runs and the ratios normalize just like that. So I think he's a good option. He's not, someone you got to prioritize in your 12 teamers. If it's deeper than that, I think he's a great target. You hold him for a couple weeks, and if it still looks good, maybe you take some chances with him, or maybe you're just happy with what you got and you move on.
Yeah, and the big thing with Colin Rea too is that having come from Milwaukee, right, he's very familiar with Craig Counsell. It's probably unlikely that he gets moved out of the starting rotation, right? Even if he has a poor appearance. So, like, let's just say he doesn't do well against the Giants, it probably doesn't put him at risk for missing those Marlins and White Sox starts.
Right, and they have Cade Horton who might come up soon, but I think he'd be more likely to take Ben Brown's spot. He's been having some struggles.
All right, moving on to Saturday. Thanks to Johnny Gordon for the Eugenio in a Bottle hitter recap article. But we are going to talk about Jackson Chourio first. Went 4 for 5 with a double, a homer, a run, and 3 RBI. To say that it's been a great start to the season for Chourio is maybe a slight over-exaggeration. I think a lot of people had him pegged for, at least 25-25 ability, if not 30-30 ability. And he currently only has 6 homers and 2 stolen bases on the season. So he's kind of on track for that 30 home run season. Definitely not on track for that 30 stolen base season. Part of the issue has just been an inability to draw walks. He only has a 1.5% walk rate, leading to a 288 OBP, which of course is just leading to fewer chances to steal bases. Now, he's not necessarily the greatest person at drawing walks. Last year, he had a 6.8% walk rate, but dropping nearly 5 percentage points is pretty tough. He still is hitting the ball pretty well, though. His StatCast metrics are pretty solid. He's barreling the ball above league average. He's got a 35% hard contact rate. So that's all nice to see. It would just be nice to see that translate into actual stats. I think my question is, Churio was kind of going in the mid to late second round, maybe even in the early second round, depending on how aggressive some people were being. Do you think he's going to return that value, or do you think Churio still needs maybe another year of seasoning for us to uh, really see maybe the 25-25 guy that a lot of people were crowning him to be this year?
Yeah, I think he could hit 25-25 at some point this year, but I don't think that's enough for where he was getting picked. I mean, I remember when I was doing my draft prep, I saw him at ADP 20 or maybe even like 17. And I know how good he is and I know how highly he's always been thought of in the minor leagues, but that was really hard for me to get behind. I mean, that's just such a steep price to pay. So if he goes 25-25 and hits 270, with maybe close to 100 runs and maybe like 80 RBI, you're not going to be disappointed, but I think that's probably more like third round value than pick 20 value. So I might be nitpicking a little bit. Yeah, he's looking a little bit slow out of the gates. I think he's in a little bit of a funk right now. 1.5% walk rate, that's definitely alarming. You don't really see that from guys like him. I don't think that he's a bad player, but I do have a little bit of concern about his ability to return that ADP value. That was one that I was definitely not taking. I wouldn't say I was fading him because he's such a talented player, but it was a little too steep for me for sure.
Yeah, I was pretty outspoken at PitchCon about how I did not want Jackson Churio on my teams. I did pick him up in one of my fantasy leagues. I think it was a 10-teamer, and I got him at the end of the second round, so probably a little higher than even I wanted him at, but he was kind of the best option of the remaining outfielders. Um, yeah, man, it's tough because you want to see these young guys succeed, and I think the thing with Churio was that he looked great in the second half of last season, right? So maybe it's a cold weather thing that he's dealing with. Obviously, he plays in Milwaukee, but it is an indoor stadium. There's all these things that you can say to blame the poor performance. I think the walk rate being so low is just really interesting, and I don't know what's going on there. So I did want to shout out Eugenio Suarez, who did hit 4 homers and 4 at bats on Saturday. I have him on one of my fantasy teams still, so I had a lot of fun with that outing.
And there you go.
But you should really not have Suarez like on any sort of weekly league. He's still, in my opinion, like a top 10 roto third baseman because he just hits homers in like spurts like this. But my goodness, he's probably one of the more frustrating like weekly league third basemen to hold. Probably he's probably on a team in like a 15 teamer. He's definitely not rostered a 12 teamer. But yeah, shout out to Eugenio who just never surprises with just how many homers he can actually hit in a very short span.
Yeah, I hope nobody left him on their bench.
Yeah, exactly. I think my old co-host Lee Keller has posted on Twitter about some guy who I think he was facing in fantasy on Saturday who left Eugenio on the bench. And I was like,
Oh,
oh, that sucks.
should go buy a lottery ticket after that.
Yeah, exactly. All right, moving on to pitchers. Thanks to Nick for the "So You Say There's a Chance" SP Roundup article. Of course, referring to Yusei Kikuchi, who I actually watched his start live, and it was awful. The guy could not strike anyone out. But anyways, we're not talking about Yusei Kikuchi. We are talking about Jesus Luzardo of the Phillies, who got a win against the Cubs. 6 innings, no one runs, 3 hits, 3 walks, and 5 strikeouts. The Jesus Lizard continues to dominate thanks to his new sweeper, which currently has a 38% O swing rate and a 42% CSW. He currently sports a 1.73 ERA and a 1.07 whip, and the expected numbers aren't so egregiously higher that this feels like a fluke. I think his expected FIP and expected ERA are maybe like 1 run higher, which is, probably something you would expect for a guy who's maybe, punching above his weight class. But at the same time, it's not like astronomically higher. The one thing I could maybe point to is how much lower his home run rate is this year. I think it's like 0.25 home runs per nine or something like that when he's usually in the mid ones. But you can't even explain that with park factors because Citizen Bank Park, which he normally pitches now as a Philly, actually has a higher park factor for homers compared to Lone Depot Park where he pitched for the Marlins. It's probably helped that he did shelve his slider. That was the pitch that was giving up a bunch of homers, 15% home run to fly ball rate last season. And he's basically opted to use this sweeper, which has been pretty dominant. So my question about Luzardo, I think, is, is this real is probably the easiest question to ask. But I think, like, do you feel like he can dominate with just kind of a fastball sweeper makeup and kind of throw a changeup here and there?
Yeah, I think with the version of the stuff he's been showing so far, he can be really successful with it. I don't think he's gonna, dominate outing in and outing out and prove himself as an ace, but he's up a tick. The new shape on the slider sweeper seems to really be paying dividends for him. So I think that those two changes, the velo bump and kind of the change in the pitch shape is going to take him a long way. We already know how talented he is and how he's had great stretches. So it's nice to see him, continue to string it together. Obviously, he's going to regress, but with all these early season hot performances, the question is always, what is he going to regress to? We've seen times where Jesus Luzardo was unrosterable because he's just getting shelled out there. I don't see that happening anytime this year. Hopefully, it seems like he has taken a meaningful step forward, and even the season long line I think is going to be really good. I kind of see him. He pitches in the rotation with Ranger Suarez, or I kind of see him as a similar guy, but just with more whiffs. Maybe slightly better ratios too. I think that, yeah, I think you're gonna get some great value if you have Luzardo on your team.
Yeah, and I think the big thing is just not using that slider, right? The old slider at least, because if that's giving up that many homers, you take that pitch out, you swap it for something that's got a little bit more horizontal bake, which may be a little bit harder to figure out where it's going. Then maybe that helps with the whiz, but also helps with maybe getting a little bit weaker contact or something like that.
Yeah, it's a much firmer pitch, and I think that some research has shown that even if your breaking ball doesn't have exceptional movement, if you throw it harder, it just reduces the amount of time that hitters have to react, and you can get some really good results with it. Looks like a 5.43 PLV on the sweeper so far, and he's throwing that a quarter of the time. That's like a 80th percentile pitch, so that's a big addition to the arsenal.
Yeah, it's definitely showing dividends right now early in the season.
All right, going to Sunday, April 27th. Johnny Gordon was on our hitter recap with talking about Jordan Alvarez, asking, has Jordan lost his Alvarez? Impossible not to cringe, reading that one, but good creativity on Johnny's part. I'm not going to talk about Jordan, who has started slow before, and I'm pretty confident that he's going to figure it out. I'm going to talk about Andy Pajes. He's had maybe the best week of any player in the last 7 days. He went in this game on the 27th. Not his only great game in the last week, but one of them. He went 4 for 5 with a home run, a run scored, and 4 RBI. He's basically doing his Mookie Betts impression up there, hitting his third home run in 5 games. He's now up to 6 homers on the season. It was 5 after this one, and then he went deep again. He might be red hot right now, but about 10 days ago, he was pretty much as cold as it gets, hitting 159, 274, 270. So no power there until this power binge this past weekend with the OBP even higher than the slugging. His Statcast page, Johnny pointed out, has some blue lollipops on it, right? It's not blood red like we always want to see for a hitter that we're adding. Except for his fielding stats, he's been decent in center field for the Dodgers. Johnny, he comes down on the side of enjoy the weekend if you streamed him, and then just take what you got, be happy with him winning you some categories, and move on. So I'm wondering, pouring a little bit of cold water on the great weekend from Pajes. Is this where we are on the guy, or do we think that there's a little more upside?
Uh, it's tough because you look at his 2024 stats. In 443 plate appearances, this was his first year in the majors. 13 homers, 65 runs, 46 RBI, one stolen base. That's not a bad line for a guy who is a fifth outfielder in a 15-team league. I
Mhm.
would be hesitant on picking him up in a 12-teamer, but I think he makes a lot of sense at 15-teamers. If he can get you that power and like he's in this Dodgers lineup, he's currently batting eighth, which really means that if he gets on base, the people who are batting him in are guys like Mookie Betts, Shohei Ohtani, Freddie Freeman. Like that's not bad to have come behind you in the lineup. So I think he's going to be probably a decent runs contributor, and he's got a little bit of pop. He's shown a bit more pop in the minors, but that was like high A stats or
Mhm.
rookie league stats. So take those with a grain of salt. But I think he could get to 20 homers on the season, and if he does get to that, I think that probably makes him rosterable in like a 15-team five outfielder league.
Yeah, no, I think he needs to be locked in those formats. I agree that he's not a priority and he's probably a streamable guy in 12 team three outfield leagues. But I think when it gets to 12 team five outfield, I mean, that's 60 guys right there, not even counting utility. So I think that he should definitely be rostered in those formats. I'm a little more optimistic than Johnny was. I think um, he's in a great offense, like you said. He offers a well-rounded profile. I don't think he's going to hurt you in any one category. And if he can get bumped up in the lineup, we've seen a lot of eighth and nine so far, but a little bit of six and seven during this heater. That's just going to help out his volume. So I think that could go a long way towards, just, making his profile more useful. And I was a little worried with Pages at one point because it seemed like, the Dodgers signed Hyesung Kim. It seemed like he was going to play. He's been playing well in the minors. So I thought, oh, they'll bring him up and they'll push Edmund to center field, and then Page's playing time is going to dry up. But if he's playing like this, they're not going to sit him. So I think that if he's in there 6 to 7 days a week, so I think that it's kind of a quiet, underrated type profile, maybe like an Ian Happ type profile sort of
Hmm.
thing. So I think that it's going to return value even if you don't expect a lot. You kind of just look at the whole sum of the parts, and it's a pretty good return.
Yeah, it is. It is going to be interesting to find this year's Ian Happ. Um, I had a lot of fun with Ian Happ last year, and it would be nice to get like an outfielder who just casually hits 30 homers.
Yeah, he spikes. He's kind of. I have him on a team, and I was thinking about dropping him, and then he won an absolute heater. And yeah, he's kind of just like your third or fourth outfielder, and he hits at the top of the order, hopefully scores you 100 runs. Then you look back and you're like, oh wow, he did a lot for my team this year.
Yeah, exactly.
There's definitely a place for that. You got to mix in the risk with the steady eddies. So I get it. And on the pitching side for the 27th, it was Nick covering the next of Quinn. Shout out to Jose Quintana, who spun another great outing and continues to have some renaissance of sorts in Milwaukee. I'm not going to talk about him. I want to talk about instead somebody who has been struggling to start the year, but was really good on Sunday Night Baseball in Wrigley Field, and that's Aaron Nola. He unfortunately did not get a decision in this outing, but he went 7 innings with one earned run, 3 hits, one walk, and 6 strikeouts. He had 16 whiffs and a 30% CSW on 99 pitches. So super strong from Nola against a really tough offense. And Nick points out that Nola really needed this one. Curveball was great, which is one of his trademark offerings, but he mixed in a cutter 36% of time to right-handed hitters, which is pretty shocking. That's not really an offering that he's often featured in his career, but it returned 40% CSW, which, was able to keep the righties off of his sinker. Nick feels like this can work moving forward, especially considering that his sinker and four seamer were sitting 91 to 92 instead of the 90 that we saw earlier this year. So if we see that again, might be concerning, but we're hopeful that he can maintain that velocity, and he gets a tough matchup this weekend against the Diamondbacks. So that's going to be a good barometer of where he's at right now. And his season long line is still ugly. He's got a 5.40 ERA and a 1.4 WHIP and no wins. So he's dug himself a hole to start the year, and it's the old Aaron Nola odd year thing. But can he dig himself out of this hole?
My standard answer is odd year Arnola. Like, I just don't know if I can trust this guy. That being said, I think the cutter, right, like you mentioned, he threw it 17 times, so it wasn't like he only threw the pitch 6 times and it worked really well. He more or less has not used it that much this season. 9.4% usage on the year, but in this started with 17.2% usage. So he is increasing that pitch maybe conscientiously. Now it might just be one start, right? It's hard to say.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't, as weird as it is, I just don't trust an odd year Nola. There's just something up with him. And if this cutter proves to be like a thing that he's using for the next 2-3 starts, it's returning the same types of value, then like maybe I'll consider him in like a 12 teamer. But yeah, for me, I just want to stay away because it's just too volatile. I think with Nola, he can be good, and then he just returns like a couple bad starts, and it's really frustrating to deal with as a fantasy manager.
Yeah, yeah, I don't blame you. It is, he's a guy who brings a lot of volume. So, and I talked about this week in my Patience or Panic article with him and Marcus Semien. They both bring you a lot of volume. So when they're not doing well, they really drag your team down because they're doing it over a large sample, so it has a bigger effect on your stats. I'm hopeful with Nola. I don't, think he necessarily is going to return to like that SP2 status that we used to really like from him and expect from him. But I do think that he's hasn't completely fallen off. His velo is down a little bit to start the year, like Nick was talking about in the roundup. But he's kind of been a slow starter. I looked at his game log velocities from the past few years, and all of his lowest velocity games are in April. So he kind of ramps up as the season goes on. But then again, a couple of the very lowest ones were from this year. So even if he does ramp up a little bit, he might not get quite back to where he has been in years past. And that might knock down his effectiveness a little bit. So I think that he kind of fits like that Holly definition that Nick has, a guy with a 23 or so percent strikeout rate, who just kind of eats innings and provides decent ratios. But I think there is unfortunately a little bit more risk here in his profile than there used to be.
Yeah, the challenge is the ratios, I think, with Nola. But maybe if you pick him up now, right? You find a way to trade for him, or if he's on your waiver wire, maybe the ratios aren't so bad from now until the end of the year because you got to dodge all the bad starts in April.
Yeah, you could try to buy low, and I think that the bigger risk is ERA. I think that he throws enough strikes that the whip shouldn't be a problem. He is a little bit hittable, but I do think it's more of a ERA risk than a whip risk.
All right, moving on to Monday. Thanks to Christian Oddman for the Secret of Nimmo hitter recap article, and we are going to talk about Brandon Nimmo of the Mets, 4 for 6 with a double, 2 homers, 4 runs, and 9 RBI. Objectively, Nimmo has had a really bad year. He's been slashing 218, 261, 418 on the season, and that's after he had this game. He is hitting the ball very consistently, though, 44% hard contact rate, and his strikeout rate is still lower than his career average. Part of the issue here has just been the 209 BABIP. Maybe part of that could be attributed to the 5% increase in his ground ball rate, but that still doesn't tell the whole story of, how poor Nimmo's been doing. I think it's just maybe been bad luck to start out the year. He did nearly double his season total in RBI with this 9 RBI game. There's a good chance Nimmo's probably been dropped in your 12-teamer leagues. But after this game, do you feel like he's worth picking up as like an outfielder 3 right now in 12-teamers, or do you want to kind of just let it sit and see where he goes?
No, I think he should definitely be added. He's a guy who has just a super long track record of capable fantasy performance. I wouldn't say excellent. He's had good years or great years here and there, but he's had a lot of good years. And the Mets, as we can see, they're one of the best teams in the league. They've got a great offense, and if he's still hitting up top there, that's a great spot to be. I definitely share your sentiment that I think he's just getting a little bit unlucky. We have seen like a little bit of an approach change. He's not walking like he used to. We always thought of him as a double digit walk, potential 400 OBP type guy. And it looks like he's being a little bit more aggressive this year, but it's not the type of thing where he's flailing and he's swinging at everything. Seems like he's trying to be a little bit more aggressive in the zone and do a little bit more damage. So hopefully this huge game was the start of that. I hope that too many people didn't drop him and like Suarez had him in your lineup for this because 9 RBIs that'll pretty much win you a week or at least set you on the right course because this was a Monday. No better way to start your week than with the 9 RBIs.
Yeah, he's been kind of slotted between 4, 5, and 6 in the Mets lineup, which is right behind Lindor, right behind Juan Soto, right behind um,
Alonso, right?
Alonso. Yeah, so like he's got a bunch of guys who can get on base ahead of him. But with the going back in the lineup just means less reps and less opportunities to hit. So not sure if that's like a reason why he's being affected, but it is something that is dropping his stats just a tiny bit in this this season. It's just that he's not getting as many plate appearances as he was in the past.
Yeah, that's kind of a new role for him. I wonder if that has something to do with his more aggressive approach at the plate. He's not trying to see as many pitches as like a typical leadoff guy would.
Right, because he's used to batting right behind Lindor. At least that last year for a good chunk of the season, that's where he was. The only time he was batting Yulitov was when I believe Lindor was hurt. Yeah, for Nimmo, just being a couple spots back in the lineup, also behind all these power hitters, maybe there's just less opportunity for counting stats than in
Mhm.
previous years. Moving on to pitchers, thanks to Nick for the Sears Hunter SP Roundup article. We were going to talk about a guy who, Patrick, you probably have better information than I do about him. Tomoyuki Sugano of the Orioles got the win against the Yankees. 5 innings, no earned runs, 5 hits, 1 walk, and 8 strikeouts. I, like probably a lot of people, overlooked Sugano coming into the season. Of course, he's a 35-year-old import from Japan. This is his first season in the majors. It just felt like a really lame signing by the Orioles instead of going out and grabbing, a little bit more of a major league quality pitcher. But they did it, and I think a lot of people were like, I don't know if this is going to succeed. However, 6 starts into the season, he's looked fairly serviceable. Not, anything lights out, but he's got 2 quality starts. He's got 3 wins, including this gem against the Yankees, where his splitter was incredible, getting 9 out of 19 whiffs, and he had better pitch separation between his fastball and his breaking pitches. Do you think Sugano's like a guy to keep an eye out for in 12-teamers, or do you think this was more of that was a nice outing, but it's probably not what he's consistently going to be?
Yeah, I think he is a streamer. He's kind of the definition of a streamer. He doesn't offer much strikeout upside at all. These 8Ks kind of came out of nowhere. He has one of the lowest strikeout rates in the league for a starting pitcher. So you target him in weak matchups and hope he comes through for you. I think the Orioles do have a relatively easy schedule on tap for May, so that could be a good time to stream Sugano, or to hold him for a couple weeks and take advantage of that. So yeah, he's got a super deep arsenal, and he's kind of was known in Japan as a command artist, and that's the type of thing that might take a little bit of time to translate. He pitched in a new country with a new baseball, but it seems like he's hitting his stride, and the Orioles really need it because he's pretty much their only starting pitcher I have confidence in right now. So yeah, I wouldn't expect another 8 strikeout outing from Sugano, but he seems more like the type of guy who will work deep into a game, throw 6 or 7 innings with 4 or 5 strikeouts, and just put your team in a good position to win. And usually that comes along with a quality start and a win opportunity. So I don't think he's not a top priority, right? You don't have to blow your fab on him, or your number one waiver priority. But when you see that he's pitching tomorrow and he's got a weak matchup, he's I think that the ceiling is a little bit low, but the floor I think is also pretty high. So now we are moving on to Tuesday, April 29th. This day was a big day for the Yankees. Scott McDermott had the hitter recap, Rice in his veins, with a shout out to Ben Rice for another multi-home run game. I unfortunately was at the game, in Camden Yards. I felt kind of like Tyler O'Neill, like I needed to go on the IL with neck soreness, watching all those Kyle Gibson home run balls fly over the right field wall. But we still won the series, so it's all good. But I'm not going to talk about Ben Rice. I think we've talked about him before, and he just looks absolutely locked in right now, and was a great ad when you got him. So I'm going to talk about another guy who just has kind of not come out of nowhere, but had a real career resurgence. That's Jorge Polanco. He's second and third base eligible in most formats and is back with the Mariners. On this day, he also had multiple home runs. He went 2 for 3 with 2 long balls, 2 runs, 5 RBIs, and a walk. He is dealing with a side injury right now that's preventing him as a switch hitter from facing lefties and hitting from the right side, but he is just absolutely mashing from the left side against righties. And Joe Adele made a nice catch to rob him on a potential 3rd home run of the game. So Polanco has just absolutely been going off. He has 9 home runs. He's hitting 384. On a surprisingly resurgent Mariners offense. His sprint speed has dropped off a little bit, so it doesn't seem like speed is going to be a big part of the equation. But when he's flashing this kind of power, you're thrilled about that, especially with double eligibility on a guy who you probably scooped off of waivers the first week or 2 of the season.
Yeah, I was actually going to talk about Polanco on Monday, and then I saw that you were going to talk about him on Tuesday. So I was like,
He's had a lot of good games lately.
Yeah, we don't need to talk about Polanco twice. But he's been that good. A little bit of a flash in the pan, but I think he's been steadily consistent throughout the season and at least hitting the ball hard. His barrel rate's pretty high relative to his career average, so there's that. And he's just not going to be the guy that gets you a bunch of stolen bases at this point. Could he get you a bunch of homers, though? I think that's possible. Playing in Safeco is probably a little bit tough for being able to hit more homers, I think, for him. But I think probably the slight issue here is that he's just not facing lefties right now because he can only bat from the left side. I think once that injury heals, right, and he just kind of keeps the same momentum that he has right now, he's going to be in the lineup every day. The Seattle needs it too, with a bunch of infielders that are out on the injury list too. So they're going to take every at bat they can get from Polanco. He's also on a 1 year contract, so there's really no motivation for them to kind of sustain him for the following years. And yeah, I think that makes Polanco a very interesting pickup if he's still available in your leagues.
Yeah, they've been losing guys left and right in Seattle, and they've still been scoring a ton of runs. It's pretty shocking. I feel like we like to give the Mariners a hard time for having just completely inept offenses, but I saw a tweet earlier today that since August 1st of last year, they've played like half a season, 82 games, and they're top two in the AL and WRC plus, walk rate, home runs, steals. Like, I guess we gotta start changing the narrative a little bit about this Mariners offense. Pitching in Seattle, still a good place to pitch, but not a slam dunk by any means.
Yeah, and they're going to need the bats because of the injuries to their rotation as well.
Yeah, yeah. It's like when one thing's working, the other one just falls off. It's funny how that works sometimes. So on the pitching side, the header from Nick on the SP roundup, and this one was about Bowden Francis. Francis waving the white flag. I think he and Kyle Gibson both gave up 5 home runs on Tuesday, so not a banner day for those two. I know that Nick has been tepid on Bowden Francis in the past, so hopefully you all have stayed away. But if you didn't, it might be time to jump ship. And I'm going to talk about another guy who's struggling, and it's been a bummer to see because Sandy Alcantara missed the last year with elbow surgery, and we were all really excited for him to come back because we know how good he can be when he's at his best. But he hasn't been this year. It's been really ugly. And this was hopefully a matchup you sat because he was pitching against the Dodgers in LA. But he took the loss going 2 2/3 with 7 earned runs, 7 hits, 5 walks, and 2 strikeouts. 9 whiffs, 23% CSW on 79 pitches. So just he just got completely shelled in this one. And unfortunately, he has the Dodgers again next week. So this kind of puts us in a tough spot because the ratios are really ugly right now. I wouldn't feel comfortable starting him in almost any matchup. Nick's recommending a stash, at this point. So keep him on your team, but not start him. And, hopefully either we see him start to turn it around because we know how talented he is, or he goes on the IL because he's dealing with something that's affecting his performance. So that's been 16 earned runs in the last 3 starts. So, I'm wondering, is he cooked, or at least for this year, is he a guy that, we can't have because we can't trust him?
Yeah, I think the challenge is that he looked so good in his first start,
Yeah.
right? Like there's still some blips here and there, but it was like, oh, this is like kind of what we expected Sandy to look like. In terms of worrying metrics, the fastball velocity is like down a tick, or actually 2 ticks technically.
Mm.
And the sinker velocity is also kind of down a tick. So it's just maybe a little worrying that the velocity's not come back since Tommy John. So I don't think he's necessarily cooked, but I think a big part of Sandy was his velocity, right? That's how he was so good, right? With the 98-mile-an-hour sinkers coupled with his 90-mile-an-hour fastball. But when he doesn't have that velocity, even if it's down a tick, it's just maybe just not as effective as it could have been in the past. I still agree though, just to like keep him, just stash him. I don't think there's necessarily a reason to drop him. Like maybe you consider trading him for someone with a little bit more value, but those trades are always a little bit harder to execute when a guy's doing poorly. So yeah, I think he's still worth a stash. He's not droppable in my opinion, but he's a guy that you probably need to watch out for and just see, what is the velocity looking like, and maybe just kind of hope he goes on IL instead of the Marlins is trying to have him go for starts here or there until they can trade him in June or July.
Yeah, I generally agree. I do think he is droppable, but I don't think that means you need to drop him. If you're languishing in the standings a little bit and you need to, win your matchup this week or make an upgrade and you see a good option out there, I wouldn't be like, get this guy off my team. Sometimes we have guys who have terrible ratios and we can't wait to cut them. I don't feel that way about Sandy, but I do think if you need to do something because you have a sense of urgency with your team, I wouldn't fault you for making a tough decision. I think that, this kind of shows why we're so tepid about drafting guys who are coming back from major injuries. Sometimes it looks like you got a huge bargain because the guy who comes back looks basically like the guy he was before. And sometimes it looks like this, and the guy's almost unrecognizable from his former self. So hopefully he can get back on track, at least, by the end of the season, and, just put himself in a good spot for next year. I mean, he might be on a new team, right? Who knows?
Yeah, really, really hope at least he's on a new team because
Yeah.
him being in Miami is just a tough watch.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to Wednesday. Thanks to Kyle Stansel for the All I Do Is Win hitter recap article, of course, referring to Mason Wynn. We are not going to talk about Mason, but we are going to talk about his teammate, Victor Scott II. Went 3 for 7 with a home run, a run, 4 RBI, and a walk, and a stolen base to get the combo meal. Scott has had a fairly quiet major league debut last year. He only had 5 stolen bases and a 179, 219, 283 slash line. So, nothing that indicated that this guy is someone to pick up. However, year 2 has been a lot more positive. He's got a 271, 336, 406 slash line and 10 stolen bases. Of course, that slash line kind of indicates he's never going to be a true power hitter. This homer was his second on the season. He's just, probably only good for 5 to 10 homers on the year, if that.
Mhm.
But he is really good at getting on base. He's got a 9.3% walk rate, a 348 BABIP. So I would expect a pretty decent amount of stolen bases from him. In terms of running RBI, that's the dangerous part. I don't know if he's going to get a bunch of those with just how kind of poor this St. Louis offense can be. But that being said, at what league depth are you picking up Scott? Is he like a fringe waiver wire guy in a 15-teamer, or is he someone to even keep an eye out in 12-teamers?
Yeah, I think 15 team, 3 outfield, and then 12 team, 5 outfield. He's a guy who should be on pretty much every team. It might not be started, every single scoring period, but I think he'll be added, especially if your team's in need of steals. Depending on your league, head to head, I feel like categories aren't quite as important. But if you just have a team made up of mashers and you're just looking for a guy to steal you some bags, and you couldn't get like Chandler Simpson, I think that Victor Scott's a fine option. I don't really have confidence in him to hit. He hasn't really proved that he's a good AAA hitter, much less a good major league hitter. So I think that his chances of getting out of the 8 or 9 hole in the lineup are pretty low. And that's going to hurt, in terms of runs and his overall volume. So I think that he's a one-dimensional player. I know he's hitting for a good average right now, but he has a 24% strikeout rate, which for a guy who doesn't have a lot of power, that's a little concerning. I mean, that's like slightly worse than league average. So I'm not a huge fan. I don't want to pour cold water on an exciting player, but I don't think that he's really a great major league hitter. But I think that his speed and his defense in center field can keep him in the lineup. But it's probably going to be at the bottom. So that does kind of put a little bit of a cap on his value. So 12 team, 3 outfield, maybe a watch list type, maybe an ad if your outfield's weak. But I think that his utility kind of stops at that point.
Yeah, I kind of have him as just like a poor man's Chandler Simpson because he does get everyday playing time in center field because of his defense. But he doesn't have the average that Simpson might have. He does have the speed. Obviously, 10 stolen bases in 1 month is pretty good. But yeah, I kind of agree. He's probably rosterable, but not startable.
Yeah, and he'll at least hit a few home runs, which Simpson definitely won't. But yeah, pretty comparable profiles.
Yeah. All right. Thanks to Nick for the Gorge Lucas SP Roundup article. We are going to talk about Lucas Giolito. Made his debut after 18 months. And yeah, it was against Toronto. 6 innings, 3 runs, 5 hits, 2 walks, 7 strikeouts, a no decision. And he actually looked solid. If he didn't serve up 2 changeups for homers in the 6th inning, this probably would have ended up being a shutout start. There were good signs in the start to look in terms of his pitch mix. The velocity did not take a hit. His fastball was pretty consistent at 93 miles an hour. The changeup was solid as well, getting whiffs, called strikes, and a bunch of foul balls. However, his slider was a bit of a non-factor. He only threw it 5 times, and none of those pitches ended up in a whiff or a called strike, which is kind of unfortunate because the slider was also it was an important pitch for him back when he is healthy. But if Giolito kind of sticks as a fastball changeup guy, we kind of already talked this at the start of the podcast. If he just sticks with those 2 pitches, what do you think his ceiling ends up being?
Yeah, I think in terms of ceiling, it's tough to succeed with 2 pitches in MLB, especially if you don't have overwhelming velocity. I know that Giolito's changeup is a great pitch, and it's kind of been his key to he turned his career around, right? He was one of the worst starters in the league for a period of time, and he's kind of really turned it around. So I think maybe ceiling like top 40 starting pitcher, which is attainable. If he spots the changeup well, he could have great results. I do have a little bit of concern about him pitching in Fenway. It's just a place where a lot of runs are scored. It's not bad for home runs necessarily, but it's just it's just a high scoring park. So I think that I don't know exactly where Nick has him on the list. I want to say around 50. That feels right. It feels like he should be owned in your 12 team leagues. I think he was a little bit too far off my radar at the beginning of the year, and I would have been happy to stash him, and I didn't. So I think that he's going to provide you some value. I just don't think it's going to be top 20, top 30 stuff like we've seen from him in seasons past.
Yeah, I think Nick has him. According to our website, he has him 62nd. So
Okay.
right in that fringe, yeah, 50-ish.
Yeah, and maybe he'll get a bump if he starts to show what he showed in his first start a little bit more consistently.
Yeah. All right. Well, that wraps up the player performances for the week, and now we're going to move into streamers.
Yeah.
So
So
recap.
having oh, go ahead.
Okay. So a recap of last week. Matthew Boyd, 5 innings, 6 strikeouts, 2 earned runs, 1.8 whips in a no decision. Griffin Canning, 5 innings, 0 earned runs, 1.4 whip, and a win. He hasn't had his second start yet against the Cardinals, so be aware of that. Jordan Hicks has not gone yet, and Tobias Myers in his first start back from the injured list, I believe. 2 innings, 2 earned runs, 2.5 whip, and a no decision. So not as great of a start from Myers.
Yeah, this was his second one, and I was like, he went 80 pitches in his first one. I thought he'd be great to go against the White Sox. He just didn't come through. So hoping to bounce back with some better streaming recommendations this week. I would say hopefully Hicks is a win. Canning is a win so far because he went 5 scoreless and got the win. Boyd and Myers have definitely losses, but we have some good options this week. Haven't put out my expected SP schedules article earlier this week. It was pretty easy to go ahead and find some great options for you guys next week. First one is someone who just returned that we talked about already. So Tony Gonsolin, he's 32% on Yahoo, so a little high for a streamer, but 12% on ESPN. He is getting at Miami after just having a good outing at home against the Marlins. So pretty much a no-brainer, even in your quality starts leagues. He's pretty built up. Hopefully get a super cheap win as well. Might want to hold on to him after that, or might just want to cut bait. He's kind of a fringe guy overall, but great matchup. And then a little bit more on the risky side with, if you're considering more of a volume-based approach, Luis L. Ortiz. He's with Cleveland, and he's 12% rostered on Yahoo and 4% on ESPN. He gets a 2-start week in all likelihood next week with one good matchup, which is in Washington against the Nats. And then he gets a challenging one to end the week at home against the Phillies. So if you're in a weekly league, it's more of I don't have a good 2-start pitcher this week. Let me take a chance with Ortiz. If you're in a daily league, you might really only need him for that Washington start. He is starting to show some strikeout stuff for the first time in his career. He was kind of more of like a sinker ball, ground ball guy before. Now he's striking out, I think, over 10 batters per 9. So he could be a good source of Ks and hopefully keep the ratios in check in these two. And then another Dodgers arm for our third option this week. That's Ben Kasparius. He is 8% Yahoo, 5% ESPN. He's in the rotation now basically as the replacement for Tyler Glasnow. He's not quite fully stretched out. I think he went 55 or 60 pitches last week. So he's still kind of building up a little bit, but he could get 2 starts on the road against Miami and Arizona. Again, same thing as Ortiz. If you can just start the first one, great. If you got to start 2, maybe that's more of like a 15-team 2-start type thing. And then lastly, this one's a little bit of a question mark because of some injury news, but AJ Smith-Shawver back with Atlanta, replacing Spencer Strider, 7% Yahoo, 2% ESPN. He should get a 2-start at home against the Reds and at the Pirates. So pretty good matchups there. You don't want to face the Reds on the road, but at home is great. But he was hit by a pretty hard line drive right on his throwing arm in Coors Field earlier this week in his outing. X-rays were negative, so he's day to day, and hopefully he'll be ready to go. But I would definitely say to check in on that before adding him.
Yeah, my only comment here is for Ortiz. I was going to pick him up as a streamer, and then forgot to pick him up against his start against Minnesota yesterday. And then he cooked 6.1 innings, no earned runs, 2 walks, and 5 strikeouts. So
Yeah,
Yeah, I definitely believe in Ortiz, at least against Washington. Against against the Phillies, he does have a tendency to give up a bunch of runs. So I kind of agree with you. Just don't start him for that one if you can. But yeah, that start against Washington should go pretty well.
yeah, and we know that Cleveland, they can do a lot of impressive things with pitchers. I mean, they're making Ben Lively serviceable right now. I think he put his
Oh
ERA under 4 today. So
yeah,
yeah, there seems like there's no limit to what they can do. Maybe they got some, devil magic going on there in Cleveland, like we used to say with the Cardinals.
yeah. The this is a team that was more than willing to just completely reshuffle their rotation from last year, and it doesn't look like they've lost a step at all.
No.
All right, well, that wraps it up for this week in fantasy baseball. Again, you can find us at thisweekpl on Twitter, or you can send us your comments and questions at thisweekplpod@gmail.com. You can find myself on Twitter at @thejohnk, and you can find Patrick on Twitter at pfitzgerald_99. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the Pitch List podcast feed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else you listen to your podcasts, and leave us a 5-star review if you enjoy the show. Lastly, sign up for Pitch List Pro. By doing so, you could join us in the Pitch List Discord, get advice from all of the fantasy experts and writers over there. That's all for this week. We'll be back next week with another episode of This Week in Fantasy Baseball. For Patrick, I'm John, and we'll see you in the next one. Later, everyone.